I'm gonna actually have a seat. Oh, wait, these seats are super low. So those coming out, the seats are really low, just FYI. We are going to have an amazing conference the rest of the day. I am sitting, one, because I'm tired of standing, and two, because I'm going to introduce our panel, which so here's the thing. So Chris talked about the advisory board, right? So we are walking around with the X's on. Some of us don't have X's, but we're speakers, and so you kind of see them walking around. We have worked really hard. The volunteers have worked really hard. I'm going to double down on what Chris said. Please, please, please give them opportunities, talk to them, listen to them, find out what they want to do, find out their goals, and help them get there. So that's my small commercial. You guys got to listen to elevator music while we set up the chairs. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Priya, Daniela, and Bil to the stage. You guys can come on. So I get a chance to not talk as much because I'm going to hand it over to Bil. Bil, you wanna talk?
Absolutely. Thanks, Octavia. Welcome everybody to the first panel of CyberX 2024. I am joined by three amazing security leaders here today. I'm going to ask you each of you to just give us a 1 minute name, who you are, where you work, what you do. We'll start at the end with Priya, please.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. So good morning, everyone. My name's Priya Sirwani. I'm currently play the role of global CISO for Fiera Capital. Also wear an additional hat of head of the global IT infrastructure. So Fiera Capital is an asset management firm, about $160 billion of assets under management, headquartered in Canada, but with global presence, including US, UK, and Asia. And in my role, I'm really responsible for obviously setting the global strategy, the vision, and the program for cybersecurity, basically making sure that we are able to protect our clients' information and Fiera's operations, and thereby uphold our clients' trust and Fiera's reputation. In the infrastructure side, though, my responsibility is more to just oversee the end user services and the IT infrastructure to basically make sure that our infrastructure is resilient, it's secure, and it's business enabling.
Thanks, Priya.
Thank you.
Danielle?
Hi.
Excuse me.
No, that's okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Daniela Spagnolo. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the province of Ontario. You all met my boss this morning, Mohammed Qureshi, who was earlier on stage. And so part of our program, of course, is protecting digital trust of our public citizens. And, with being a modern government and going to modern digital services, trust is everything. I have an amazing team within the province, and together we work across government, and you can imagine how vast that is, dealing with multiple ministries in a complex environment where you're dealing with federal jurisdictions, et cetera. So it's a fast-paced environment, to say the least, as we protect government services for the 2024 and beyond.
Fantastic.
Octavia?
Awesome. As you all know, I'm Octavia Howell. I'm the CISO for Equifax Canada. Equifax is a global data and technology company. A lot of people think that all we do is credit reporting and credit bureaus, but we do so much more. It is data. We actually have data on Canadians that actually help them what we call live their financial best. We also are a fraud prevention company, so we have a lot of tools and a lot of services to actually help mitigate fraud and the use of the proliferation of fraud throughout the Canadian economy. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm excited to see what we are going to talk about, Bill.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you all for joining me today. So let me set the stage here. Cyber risk, the risk of cyber attacks has grown exponentially. 2023, cybercrime cost $8 trillion, and they say by 2025, it'll be $10.5 trillion globally. The war between the cyber attackers and defenders, attackers have that structural advantage, right? They only have to be right once. We have to be right all the time. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, has recognized that not even the best resourced CISO can guarantee success against a sophisticated attack. Recently, under New York state law, they amended the cybersecurity regulations. A CISO defined as a qualified individual responsible for overseeing and implementing a company's cybersecurity program and enforcing its related policy must provide to senior governing body annual written reports that include plans for remediating, quote, material inadequacies in the cybersecurity program. The SEC, I'm sure you recently heard, dropped major changes to the reporting of security incidents, but they left off a requirement for a board-level security professional. The final rule requires public companies to disclose the occurrence of a material cybersecurity incident and describe the material aspects of the nature, scope, and timing of the incident, as well as the material impact or reasonable likely material impact of the incident on the company, including its financial condition and results of operations. It must be disclosed 4 business days after it has been deemed material. You'll hear that word material used a lot today. So first question to the panel. Data privacy regulations, government policies are rapidly evolving. How do you stay up to date and adapt your cybersecurity strategies to align with the ever-changing legal aspects? We'll start with Priya, please.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's an interesting domain in which we are. I mean, not just today, it has been overall all the time, moving fast, growing. So I think by default, most of us are wired to just be aware of what's happening outside, right? So obviously through the publications, the news materials, you know, we all stay in touch. So that's more internal. You know, obviously there's a team which is responsible to take care of some of these aspects. But I think I would also, you know, say I strongly rely on my internal and external stakeholders for the purpose of getting the information and obviously adapting the program for that. So the, you know, as an asset management firm, compliance is a key part in my firm. You know, that's more to just make sure the insider threat, conflict of interest, you know, things like those are taken care. They are my big ally. You know, I think it's important that we understand that there's a lot of work we need to do internally to sort of build that collaboration. So my chief compliance officer is an example. They get a lot of information of what regulations apply for us, what do we need to do specifically from a cybersecurity and data privacy standpoint. So I obviously have more inputs from them and then accordingly adapt our program, which is still based on industry standards. So it doesn't mean you have to really overturn anything. It's just more refinements that you need to do sometimes.
So would you say inside that, not only the relationship building that you have to do with compliance officers, risk officers, general counsel, that you really have to trust them for the nuanced aspects of how they apply, because we're all not going to become lawyers. Any lawyers here? No. We're not all going to become lawyers. You know, we're going to be able to approach it from our perspective, but you have to build that into it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, that level of partnership, relying on their expertise, because you're right, we are not all going to be the experts in that space. We'll all, as cybersecurity leaders, we need to be really more diverse in how we approach things, and then rely on the real experts, whether it's technology, legal, you know, the compliance side of the world. And this is where I think, to your point, the general counsel comes into play too, right? So again, I do have quarterly updates with our corporate counsel, which is like the external counsel that sort of provides us some validation of what we're doing, but also where the industry is heading, the type of issues that others have faced. So, you know, that's a key partnership. In addition, I also rely a lot on my other external partners, including one of the big fours that is part of my cybersecurity relationships. And again, they've seen what's happening out there. So, you know, getting that external perspective is just so important in this space, right?
Yeah.
Like we heard earlier, collaboration is the key. You know, as everybody's been insisting, we cannot work in silos, and that's really where we need to understand. There's a self-responsibility we take, partner with our internal stakeholders, and then, of course, rely on the expertise coming from the external parties there.
For sure, for sure. So, Daniela, on the government side then,
Yes.
Do you get early access to some of these changes that may come down, try to help govern them, push them in the right direction?
It's a great question, and when you're working with in the province, you definitely have your federal, provincial, territorial peers that are having these discussions, and we are part of those discussions, so yes, we do have a purview. I'm going to take a different lens as well. You know, there's policy as it, you know, applies to regulation if you're an entity. From a provincial perspective, we also are mindful for where the federal government is looking at certain critical infrastructure and jurisdictions. It can also create gaps where they're not applying focus. And so then as a provincial government, how do we come forward, for example, in the areas of healthcare, in the areas of education, and how do we work across with our ministry partners in that space to fulfill those gaps where the feds, have, put it to the local authorities such as us to play in that space. And so similar to Priya, it's about your ecosystem of allies and how we as a cybersecurity division work across with those ministry leads to provide that jurisdiction in that space. And then we do deal with vendors similar to Priya. My team also participates in a variety of committees, forums, and associations. For example, Canadian Standards Association, as it relates to cybersecurity. So are you at the table, even at those forums? Because oftentimes when policy is being developed, they do look at industry experts for consults, or they're looking at other vendors to provide insights as they're getting their, across-the-board education on the policies and regulations that further emerge. Like other forums that we engage in is Digital Identity and Authentication Council of Canada. So if you're at the table, not only are you aware of conversations, but you're able to anticipate potential impacts and have those conversations across, but you're also able to have early insights as to what's the keen interest to help get your organization prepared for those potential regulatory elements that are coming across, and how to help your peers implement them, understand them, and participate.
Fantastic. And Octavia, you're dealing with an organization that spans both U.S. and Canada. What do you see in that side? Do you see that push from the U.S., the pull? How do you deal with it in sort of that aspect?
Yeah, it's a yes and, right? And so Equifax we operate in 24 different countries. And so not just the US and Canada, but we have Australia, New Zealand, we have emerging markets, India, and also the UK. And so when we're actually looking at regulations, I'm actually doing a lot of collaboration with our regional CISOs, right? And then also looking at our BU CISOs that have to actually adhere to the regulations in the US.
Right.
And so we're looking across of, what is the SEC pushing down, the new NIST requirements, making sure that we're actually compliant ahead of time with the new ISO regulations and the new, the ISO framework that has been put out. And so it's a yes and, right? Sometimes it's a push.
Especially with the U.S. now, because the U.S. is going after privacy like Europe did, right? We have, I think, 26 different privacy laws in place based on state, and they're talking about maybe doing a federal one, which would twist it again.
I don't know. I'm American. I really don't know about that.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, if there's a way that they can actually figure out how to regulate privacy across all of these
52
states.
laws are on the books, on the Hill right now being discussed, trying to figure out how to do it. It's an absolute mess.
Yeah, we'll see. However, I do think that if you're actually looking at what's out there right now, you have regulations in India that's coming out as well. And so you're looking across all the other global regulations, then we want to make sure that we're actually in a fit to handle all of them.
Right. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So many of these changes are coming on the heels of a couple of very high-profile court cases. Uber and SolarWinds. Uber CISO Joe Sullivan was charged with obstruction and misprision of a felony. He was convicted in court, sentenced to 3 years probation, fined $50,000. A warning was given by the judge to the industry. He said he's not going to do jail time as this is the first case of its kind, but he would not be so lenient on the next CISO standing before him. More recently, Tim Brown, who is now the CISO of SolarWinds, was not at the time of the breach, has been named as a defendant in a case brought by the SEC. The charges focus on outward statements made by the company in public filings and their lack of alignment with internal communications involving Tim specifically on the lack of resources and effectiveness of the security program in place. So these are both U.S. legal cases, but we've seen in the past what starts in the U.S. tends to push into Canada. Given these two examples, are any of you worried about the potential legal risks you face as a CISO? Octavia, I'll start with you.
Yeah, when the cases initially broke, I was, right? And then I pivoted. It's kind of like that initial shock of it all, right? And then it's okay, so what, Like, what do you do about it? How do you make sure that you actually take those lessons from those cases and actually change the way that you operate?
Right.
Most security practitioners, we have a hard time talking to other people outside of security. So we like to come to things like this because finally we're being heard, right? And people understand. You don't have to, you don't have to soften your message. You don't have to appear to be, so less frightening, right? And so we have to work on that. And I think one of the things that I did in particular was to actually start building those collaborative relationships to try to figure out where the interlockings work.
Right.
It's a concern. It's still a concern. However, instead of actually being, frozen in place from it, it's how can you actually ensure that you are having those relationships, protecting yourself, making sure that you can actually, operate a program, and actually so the company and the business can actually see the business value of security, because security is a huge business value and it's a huge competitive edge when it comes to, the industry in general.
Oh, yeah. It is a business enabler nowadays.
Absolutely.
Thankfully, we have gotten out of we're a cost center that, provides no value to a place where we actually provide the value. Priya, I'm going to go to the other side on the financial side. What about you? How are you feeling on that side? Are you working with the GCs? Or is it just, I'm doing my job?
No, I don't think we could ever have done that, right? Even before the Uber and the SolarWinds incident, to your point, business, sees us as, it used to see us as a cost center before. Now we're part of the enablement function. We bring value to the business. And I think this is where in my sector, particularly in my company, what I do more is just have more partnerships, right? So simple things like these. For me, this was, to your point earlier, it was more a shock before. But I then at least thought that it's a good reminder to be more cautious and thoughtful about how we approach our job. It's not just about coming and securing and talking about the CIAs. It's also about making sure everybody understands what this means. So in that framework, again, there's more internal groups and committees that I have. I now make sure more to actually table some of these things up front, right? So there are two big areas that we discuss security a lot. So we've got an enterprise risk management committee, which includes the chief risk officer, the chief compliance officer, our investor relations person, because at the end of the day, they face the brunt. Obviously myself, internal controls and audit. So these are more governing kind of functions. We discuss security there in some ways. We discuss impact. We discuss materiality concept, right? Because this is so foundational in this journey. And then I also have a security governance committee, which is more my leadership, the executives of the company, all the C officers, really. And we meet monthly on these things, right? It's a short 30-minute meeting. But the idea is for them to be aware of what's happening. Things like these, they are also reading. Perhaps they might not read it with the same intensity that we are feeling as the cybersecurity community and the CISOs here. So it's, again, more making it more relevant for them, helping them to assess and understand, and getting them to see the side of the story that we are playing, right? On one side, we're business enablers. We have to do everything with the limited budget. We have to, obviously, the threats start from the technology side, so you do need to know technology. You don't need to be an expert, but you still need to have that breadth there. But the impact is usually on the business and the reputation and the clients, right? So you need that dimension too.
We have to know our business way better. We need to understand how we make money, why we make money, or why we are in business, if we're a government agency or if we're a nonprofit, et cetera. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, I'm kind of happy this has happened. I feel sorry for the people involved, but I'm happy that it happened because it has legitimized us as a profession, right? We're no longer the security people in the back room there. We're now getting to be able to sit at the table and say, I've got skin in the game, real skin, just like a CFO or a CEO, and it comes out of that. Now, Daniela, on the government side, I'm sort of really interested in sort of where this sits. I'd be hard-pressed to see somebody from the government charged in court, but I don't know, is that something that you're worried about? Have you had any conversations around it?
We haven't had conversations per se internally. I think the government has an excellent and robust governance structure. It sounds equivalent or in parallel to what I've heard from my peers here, we have a chief risk officer. We have our corporate corporate chief officer, which Mohammed's done the role before. So he was our inaugural cyber information security officer. So because of that, there's a lot of conversations happening at the table with regards to security. The other facet that makes security part of our daily conversation is the citizens. So the citizens that are impacted bring cybersecurity and just being protected at the forefront. So it would be surprising to hear that it's not part of the foundation of our government services.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
So that citizen lens as well shines light on it.
So heading down that path then, if there was a breach, if there was a breach, what methods or controls would you use to sort of determine materiality?
It's a good question, and part of, being practice prepared for an event, as you said, one of the things that you learn in cybersecurity early on is it's not if, it's when, right? So how do you protect yourself? How do you recover? So part of that business conversation that we have within the government is really sitting together with our business leaders. So those ministries that are providing the services for those various product lines, driver's license, et cetera, that everyone consumes on a regular basis, sitting at the table with our business partners, sitting at the table. Also there is our chief risk officer, and going through those systems, applications, even the data itself that it has significant value. And similar to what I heard Chris Roberts in his discussion talk about, that itemized list of discussing what is of ultimate value in terms of an asset, how are we protecting that asset, and its translation of value to the organization as a whole. And that becomes part of our enterprise risk landscape, right? So foundational, all our stakeholders know what is of top importance, and it also helps with business planning, not only on the cybersecurity side, but sunset schedules, roadmaps, driving those investments to make sure that, that entity that we're protecting, that asset, is robust from a cybersecurity perspective, from a lifecycle management, which is key to embedding security in business, which is part of that key conversation. And so, back to your question, the original question, if and when. So if you already have that, itemized inventory of your assets and where they reside, should an impact happen to one of those assets, you've already assessed it for materiality up front in terms of potential impacts. So, that's the way the government's taking it. And the reason why it's really foundational is because it is that whole of government approach, with regards to all the stakeholders included. And I'm not going to, we can't forget our compliance and audit folks. So audits as well want to know what are those key assets, and do we have those controls in place to ensure that we're protecting them across the board, even from a business perspective.
For sure, yeah, it drives budgets, or it should drive budgets. We hope it drives budgets, that we're approaching it correctly. So Priya, in Fiera Capital, if you're looking at sort of those assets and coming to a conclusion on materiality of breach, from a security perspective, I'm sure you'll be able to sit back and go, okay, we've lost access to X number of records, or we've had a system compromised, but then tying it to the financial statements, because that's now what the SEC is looking at, that's what New York State Financial is looking at, or their financial cybersecurity laws, around the material impact to the business, which, again, I find the way some of the US legislation is written puts lots of wiggle room in this, right? But I think from a practitioner's perspective, I think we need to learn some of our business aspects and how it applies. Is that how you guys are approaching it, or is it by committee, or do they stand back and say, Priya, tell us, are we in trouble or not?
No, that's exactly where, the committee plays a big role. So the Enterprise Risk Management Committee I talked about, where we have everybody which can see risk in different angles, the internal audit, risk, compliance, myself, and the investor relations. Actually, there's been a lot of discussions on materiality. We've spent about 3 or 4 last meetings talking about it, because in some way, from a financial angle, the company has identified what would be irrespective of cybersecurity, right? If you had a fraud, if you had a failure of some nature in the process and the controls, which would have resulted in material loss or monetary loss, what would be material? And that obviously depends on the revenue of the firm. It depends on the the bottom line really as to where you want yourself to be. And accordingly, we've actually changed numbers too, as the company has gone through some changes. What we started as a number which we said was material as a financial impact is now much lower, right? Just as the company's risk appetite has also altered a bit. So that's one part of it. We also then engage our business partners, really the leaders who are supporting our institutional clients, our high net worth clients whose money we run and support, right? And also getting from them what would be an impact that they would see on their customers. Of course, if you have customer data compromise, every client is important and every client needs to be treated equal. But certain clients have a different requirement in terms of how we communicate, how we tell them. All those things are being factored in. Not that we've reached the end state, but I think there are lots of discussions that are happening on these fronts, to determine the materiality, really.
Gotcha. Octavia, so again, how many countries?
24.
24 different countries. That's an interesting material assessment. How does that play into your assessment of what, I assume, you look at Canada, you're looking at yourself, what's happening to us, but then something in the US may affect you, for sure, or Australia, Japan, India, wherever you are. How do you guys deal with it from that perspective?
Yeah, I think it goes back to knowing your business, right? Knowing your business, knowing the interconnectivity within your business, knowing what systems speak to India, what systems speak to Canada, to the US, how do they actually interconnect? And so it's understanding how the business model works, also understanding what we call products, what enables a product, right? And so we can have something where there used to be materiality used to say, when there is a system that is actually a control and a technical system failed, then we actually have a breach. Well, that definition now has changed, right? Because you have new privacy laws, you actually have, where it's not necessarily a breach, but a severe materiality of data that's actually out.
Right.
Right? And so we're actually looking at how do we ensure that we are enabling ourselves and our stakeholders, our attorney, general counsel, our CEO, understand our product, having monthly meetings with our product teams to understand what new products are coming out, how to actually connect to the US, if we're actually connecting this region, what's the separation between Canada, US, Liberia, our Indian and UK. And so we're looking at all of them across the board, right? And so looking at whether we want to actually consider something that is internal data and looking at a data classification, internal data versus data that can actually harm us.
Right.
And so if it's material, it's data that can either harm us, our customers, or our consumers. And our consumers are like you and I.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Like, having that inventory, I've preached inventory for years, and not just what laptop do we have, but what piece of data do we have? Where does it reside? What is the purpose within? There was a discussion that happened years ago with General Electric, where the CIO asked the board, what's important? And they said intellectual property, because they are an IP company. That is, they have ideas, brilliant ideas, and they build brilliant things. And he said, well, which part? And they went, well, all of it. And he said, well, hang on. So I should apply the same security program to the washing machines that I apply to the jet engines, right? And it starts to dawn on people, washing machines are a $50 million business, but the only difference really is color and style or something like that, whereas the jet engines, those are decade-long programs. They run forever. They are trillion-dollar industries, and the difference of approach needs to happen. By the way, just so you guys have realized, we are over halfway through this, and we haven't said CVE once. We haven't talked about a product yet. And I want to stress that because this is where this role is going, right? We are not CISOs that sit in the boardroom and talk about the number of vulnerabilities that we've patched and the CVEs and the web application firewalls we put in. That's not the world. You need to start learning about the business. You need to understand how to talk to business people like they are business people, develop those relationships so that you do have that seat at the table when those discussions are happening. So speaking of which, reporting structures. This one is in some cases, nobody cares, and in other places, this is dear to the heart of a lot of people. The reporting structure of CISOs to the CEO. I'll be upfront and honest. I firmly believe CISOs should report to the CEO. We are at that point in the contribution to the business and the impact to the materiality of the business as well. But it's not happening. It's just not happening quick enough. Can I ask where you guys report? Octavia, I'll start with you. Sort of what's your reporting structure inside the organization?
Yeah, so within Equifax Canada, I report directly to the president and CEO of Equifax Canada.
Perfect.
We also have a dotted line into the U.S., into the global CISO as well.
Fantastic. Priya?
So I report currently into the CFO, but this is just because the role for the Chief Information and Business Operations Officer is just vacant at the time. But historically, that's where I've reported the Chief CIO, and the difference is they have the business operations under them too. So it's not just pure technology, it's a business-centric leadership role that I report into, and then obviously at this stage I'm reporting into CFO, which is again a different dimension, but risk is better understood there as well.
Definitely have to learn to speak financial if you report to a CFO.
That's true, yeah, and the budgets are always under spotlight for some reason.
Absolutely. Daniela, inside the government, whereabouts are you?
So I report to the Corporate Chief Information Officer, so Mohammed Qureshi, and he reports into the board. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, fantastic. So I've reported to a CIO before as well. Actually, years and years ago, when I joined SuccessFactors, I was going to report to the CIO, and I raised an issue. I said that there's a conflict of interest in that. CIOs build infrastructure. I report problems with infrastructure. It was back then. This is back in 2007. So I said, look, every material issue goes to you and the general counsel. Out of the gate, out of the box, no filtering on my side. It will always go that way. And I did that to protect myself, because what I always had to have was, when the board meeting was happening, I needed 2 people in that room that knew about the issues, right, and had different perspectives on it. I need my GC in there saying, well, we have all this stuff, I don't fully understand it, but he reported it to me, and then the CIO doing the same thing. Do you see this switch in today's climate as something, because you're reporting to President and CEO, so you were up there, you're talking about, do you feel like you're more empowered now with that relationship?
I feel like I have a seat at the table, and I can actually have conversations. I still have to do a lot of communication with my peers, right? The CTO and I are peers, his team. One of the best things that actually happened about 2 weeks ago, I had in an emergency, and I had to run out of one of our board meetings. And when I came back, the technology team was advocating for me. They were advocating for me. They were telling, our CEO, hey, we have to do this. These have these vulnerabilities. We have to do this. We have to move. And they were talking about, oh, well, the budget, this, and they were like, no, no, no. And I literally came back and said nothing. And it was beautiful. And I literally, when we walked out the room, I gave them a high five, and I was like, thank you. They were like, no, it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And it was the right thing to do because they knew about it.
Yep.
Right? It goes back to what you're saying. The general counsel knew, and then the CEO knew. Our technology team knew. The general counsel knew. Literally everyone in the room knew what was going on because we had those conversations before.
Transparent conversations are fantastic.
Exactly.
And I think you alluded to it earlier when you were talking about product, right? So not only are we there, maybe talking about the financial statements, making sure we get it right there, protecting the data that's inside, but new products are getting built all the time. Yep. Coming out with new ways to maybe do driver's license, a digital identity. Love to see that one. Love to see Canada do that before anybody. But these new products are going to come out. They're going to expect, I hope, they're going to come to you guys, come to us and say, how? How do we do this securely, right? And having that relationship. Priya, on your side, CFOs, and that's they always seem to talk money. Right? You come in, you say, oh, we're going to do this, 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 and you can see the dollars just in their head, and just, how do I back this out? How do you find that work?
Yeah, so I think with the CFO, to your point, they think and they understand risk very well. So I think that's very good state, really, because then you just talk in the conversation of risk, which, cybersecurity is a key domain within the risk space. So it's much easier in some way. Obviously the dollar impact is always going to be something that you discuss more in detail with CFOs, but they understand risk well, and so that's been an easy conversation. It's also better because then they read things here and there. They understand the reliability that they have, right? With Sarbanes-Oxley coming in, CFOs have obviously been a little bit more thoughtful about these things. And in some way, these Uber incidents and the SolarWinds incident are almost like the Sarbanes-Oxley for our space,
Yes, they are,
really, right? Like
absolutely.
it's just introduced us to that similar story that happened 20 plus years back in the world of accounting, which resulted in the CEOs and the CFOs having to certify these statements now. And that's really where we are heading to. So I think for the CFO to understand and accept this has been much easier, I would say. And obviously, they think about the bottom line, how the business is going to operate. The part that they don't fully get it is, sometimes the elements of you still need to make a lot of investment in technology because that's really where the source of the incidents happen, right? And that's the part you need to spend more. When I was reporting into the CIO and also the business operations officer, I think the key part there was even in that individual's job description and the day-to-day conversation was, they are obviously business-centric too. And some way, because I'm reporting into that individual on security, security is part of their responsibility too. So if things do go wrong, it does impact them too. So, right? So I think we've also moved a little bit away from that era where CIOs were just delivery and nothing else. And if you report it into them, you are finding gaps on their environment. It's pretty much they have whole responsibility, and you're a good part of it. And I don't think we had much challenges there either, as long as your business-centric approach there, your impact is clearly explained, and there's some level of clarity maintained, which I have in a couple documents, because interestingly for me, when I took this technology role, that's where I started to feel that I might be introducing conflict, right? I'm CISO by default. I've done cybersecurity 25 years. But as we were getting into the cloud, and secure by design is a core principle that I believe in, that my leader believed in as well. It would be good if the CISO takes over that responsibility, because then everybody thinks security by thought and not by force, right? But then it was like, if I'm also responsible for delivery now, I shouldn't be erring on the side of delivery when I have a conflict. So we clearly have a document that's signed by our board as well, that's validated by our board, but signed by our CEO, to indicate that, if I ever was in a state where I had to choose between delivery and security, or between, impact on the performance or operations, I would always err onto security and bring my leader into the mix and take it to the committee, right? So you do need to sort of have some of these controls, but largely if everybody's thinking like that, I think it's easier, and which I do see companies evolving on that front now. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, and that ability to walk away is a really interesting one, but we're starting to get really close to the end of time. Wanted to find out if there's any audience questions that they may have for the panel, or is it going to be a typical IT security style where nobody says anything? I literally can't see anything. No hands up? Yep.
Can you hear me okay? Perfect.
Yep.
Yep.
So firstly, thank you for that. Very, very detailed, very constructive, and lots of things that we were able to take back. A very quick question. Looking at the changing landscape as you see it right now, and anybody can take this on, the amount of liability you assume as a CISO. When we look at what happened with Uber, you look at SolarWinds, there's cases of some nefarious activities, and I understand that. But overall, does the climate right now make you a little bit nervous and uneasy with being a CISO simply because of the amount of responsibility and potential liability that you're taking on? Thank you.
So liability, and are we scared? Is sort of summing it up, because there have been. I'm going to give you sort of my answer first, because I've gone through this in the past. When I became a CISO, I decided I needed to be able to walk away. So I made sure that financially I was set, that I could cover myself for 12 months with no job, because if they pushed me to the edge of doing something in the gray area, I wouldn't do it and I'd walk. And having that freedom is powerful. It's great if you have a partner in life that helps as well. If you talk to them about it. This is a home transparent conversation. Because usually when you do quit, you don't talk to your partner about it. You literally quit at 4:30 in the morning, and they come down and find you drinking coffee when you should be on a plane. Not saying that happened to me, but it did. But so for you guys, is there a nervousness? Do you feel like there's a liability issue, or is that just saying, hey, I'm doing my job, I'm not in the gray area?
So I can go. I actually had, I told you we had this shock, right,
Yep.
initially. I just started going back and communicating my my commitment to the security community, right? I'm a ISC squared. I hold a CISSP. Any of you all that hold a CISSP know before you actually get granted that certification, especially if that's your first certification, you take that very seriously.
Yep.
You sign an oath, right, that you will tell the truth no matter what, and you will not do anything nefarious. You will not do anything that's going to actually put the company, yourself, or anything in a legal bind,
Yep.
right? I commit to that, and I got my CISSP a long time ago. But I commit to it, and I'm very communicative when it comes to what my authority and what I will and will not do, and I hold it on the laurels just like a doctor or attorney would do. I would say I could lose my certification.
Yeah.
Right, and so I'm very clear about that with
And I
my
think your
peers.
reputation, because in this industry, it is your reputation, right? You know, I think Sullivan's going to have trouble getting hired again because of the conviction. You look at Mudge. Mudge did the whistleblower, and there's a reason whistleblowers get a percentage of the lawsuit money, because the assumption is you're never going to work again.
Yeah.
But his reputation went up because he stood fast and took it on the chin for that. Daniela, in the government, I guess it's a little bit different, maybe?
It is a little different in the government, I will say. So I'm going to answer the question a little differently, if you don't mind. Going in the security space, one trait that, you know, up-and-coming leaders or people interested, a softer skill set, perhaps, to lean on is look at yourself, make sure that you're a person of courage. You have to have that fundamental, the courage to lead a team, to stand up to peers, and have that, I'm going to say, I call it a positive challenge. You don't want to shame individuals, and you don't want to make it a negative, but you have to put the facts and the data on the table in a respectful way. It's not about shame, right? And it takes courage to have those hard conversations. And then as an individual yourself, as an extension, social networking is so important. I think it resonated in all our conversations across the table, whether private sector or public sector. Who are your peers? How are you building your ecosystem of allies to help you navigate this landscape, and bringing these conversations at the forefront? Don't bury them, right? So it's a conversation that you have. This is the landscape. This is where we're in, so that you've got an ally across the table to help move it forward, because the last thing you want to do is not address it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you all. We're now out of time. We've actually gone over, which I think is fantastic. I love it when panels go like this. I want to thank you all for joining me today. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and we will move on.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you all.
Thank you.